Welcome back, everyone. Ready for another deep dive.
Always.
Well, today we're digging into the history of philosophy,
Oh, wow.
using Will Durant's The Story of Philosophy as, like, our roadmap.
Okay, yeah.
So get ready to tackle, big questions
Hmm.
about, like, virtue, what makes an ideal state, and even the nature of reality itself, with, of course, some of the most, I guess famous figures, right?
Yeah.
In Western thought, at least. So Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle. These guys, really.
Yeah, and what's so fascinating about them is how the concepts they wrestled with are still relevant even today, like thousands of years later. Their insights on justice, the ideal government, even like I said, the nature of reality, it still resonates.
It's pretty wild, right? Like how enduring these questions really are.
Yeah.
And Durant, like right off the bat, he paints this picture of ancient Greece, a world of like city-states and all this intellectual debate.
It was like a society where intellectual life just thrived.
Yeah.
Imagine like bustling marketplaces and everyone's having these lively discussions about philosophy. It was just part of their culture, to challenge assumptions, which really created this like fertile ground for philosophy to flourish.
And Athens especially, right? It was like the hub.
Oh, absolutely.
Because Durant mentions like its location made it this crossroads for like different cultures and ideas.
Exactly, and that's where Socrates comes in. This guy was a real character. He actually called himself a gadfly because he was constantly like questioning people's beliefs,
Yeah.
forcing them to think critically about things they took for granted.
Oh, yeah. Durant, he tells this great story of Socrates basically like dismantling this politician's definition of justice.
Oh, really?
Yeah, he just keeps asking, what is justice over and over until the guy's just totally flustered. He realizes he can't actually define it. Like, it's a perfect example, I think, of how the Socratic method works. With its, relentless questioning, it can, like, expose flawed thinking and really push us to confront those uncomfortable truths.
And the influence of the Socratic method on critical thinking, it spans centuries. It's such a powerful tool for, like you said, challenging assumptions and getting to the heart of an issue.
Hmm.
But, for Socrates, this approach also led to some, trouble.
Yeah. Sadly, Durant tells us that, all that questioning eventually led to people accusing him of, like, corrupting the youth and going against the Athenian gods.
Oh, no.
Yeah, it eventually resulted in his trial and execution, which is just this, like, sobering reminder of the price sometimes paid for, intellectual independence.
Definitely. It's a tragic end. But Socrates' legacy, it lived on through his student, Plato.
Yeah, and Durant really emphasizes how, like, deeply affected Plato was by his teacher's death. It really fueled his own philosophical journey, led him to travel to Egypt, to Italy, soaking up wisdom from all these different cultures.
Yeah, Plato's travels are, like, crucial to understanding his perspective. He met Egyptian priests with their, focus on tradition, and the Pythagoreans who were all about mathematics and harmony, and you could see all these influences woven into his later writings.
For sure. And of course, we can't talk about Plato without mentioning the Republic.
Right.
It's like his blueprint for an ideal society.
Oh, yeah. The Republic is packed with groundbreaking ideas. You've got the theory of forms, where Plato suggests that there are these perfect, unchanging realities kind of behind the, imperfect world we see every day.
Oh, interesting. And he lays out his idea of a perfect state, right? Ruled by, what does he call them? Philosopher kings, those who, like, possess both wisdom and this deep understanding of the forms.
Exactly. It's a vision of a perfectly ordered society.
Yeah.
Which, it's intriguing, but it does raise some, I think, challenging questions.
Yeah, like, is it even possible to, engineer a utopia with such, like, strict social control? At what cost, right? To individual freedom.
Right, and it's important to, like, think about the context. Plato was responding to a lot of political turmoil at the time. He was searching for a system that would create stability and harmony. But some of his proposals, they are pretty radical, even for today.
Yeah, like communal living, selective breeding, even like controlling reproduction to create the best society.
Yeah.
It just makes you wonder if that kind of control could ever really lead to a utopia, or would it just create like new forms of injustice?
For sure. And, Plato's student, Aristotle, he had some, different ideas. Durant describes him as more of a scientist than a visionary, someone much more grounded in the, like, observable world.
Oh, that's a great contrast. So while Plato was focused on these like abstract forms, Aristotle championed observation, logic, the study of the natural world, really a polymath, making contributions to logic, science, ethics, even politics.
Yeah. Where Plato searched for ideal forms, Aristotle believed that true understanding came from studying the world around us. His emphasis on, observation and analysis, it really laid the groundwork for scientific thinking as we know it.
And that's like reflected in his concept of the golden mean.
Right.
Finding virtue in moderation, avoiding extremes. It just seems like such a practical approach to life, something that's still relevant today.
Absolutely. Aristotle believed that virtue lay in, finding balance,
Yeah.
the midpoint between excess and deficiency. And it applied to everything, from eating habits to how we interact with others.
Even his view of the ideal state, right?
Yes.
Suggesting a mixed system of government, a blend of, democracy, aristocracy, monarchy, rather than just Plato's philosopher kings. He recognized that the best system, it could vary, right? Based on a society's specific needs and circumstances.
That's a very pragmatic perspective for sure,
Yeah.
acknowledging the, complexities of governing.
Definitely. Now, we've focused on these three, titans of Greek philosophy, but their influence, it didn't end there, right?
Of course not.
Durant does a fantastic job of, tracing these philosophical threads as they continue to, weave their way through history, influencing, countless thinkers and movements.
It's incredible, really, to see how the seeds planted by these ancient Greek philosophers blossomed into such a, diverse and complex intellectual landscape.
It makes you realize these questions, they're not just, relics of the past. They still shape how we see the world today.
Absolutely. And speaking of which, Durant introduces us to another pivotal figure, Baruch Spinoza.
Spinoza.
Yeah. Despite being, excommunicated and ostracized for his beliefs, he produced some of the most, profound works in Western thought.
That's wild. So his personal struggles, it seems like they really informed his philosophy.
It seems that way. His concept of pantheism, where God is identical with nature itself, it really challenges those traditional views of the divine.
Yeah, it suggests this more interconnected view of existence, where the spiritual and the material are inseparable, all part of this grand cosmic order.
Yeah.
It's a very different way of seeing the world.
For sure. And this led Spinoza to a pretty radical view of ethics. He argued that our actions, even our emotions, are actually governed by natural laws. True freedom, according to Spinoza, comes from understanding and accepting this natural order.
So it sounds kind of deterministic, right? Does that mean we don't have free will?
Well, it's a challenging concept, and definitely open to interpretation. But Spinoza, he believed that understanding this natural order could, in a way, liberate us, bring us a sense of peace and acceptance,
Yeah.
in the face of all of life's uncertainties.
So it's not about the freedom to do whatever we want,
Yeah,
but the freedom that comes from understanding the natural order of things.
right.
And aligning ourselves with it.
Exactly. It's a unique perspective on freedom, that's for sure.
Mhm.
And speaking of challenging the status quo, Durant then introduces us to Voltaire, who he calls the embodiment of the Enlightenment.
Voltaire, the master satirist, champion of reason and tolerance. Durant paints this vivid picture of his life, full of, adventure, exile, even imprisonment,
Right.
all driven by this commitment to his principles.
And his weapon of choice was satire, which he used with incredible skill, to critique everything from religious dogma to, well, the idea that we live in the best of all possible worlds, as he mocks in Candide.
And Durant really highlights how, Voltaire's use of humor makes those critiques so potent and enduring. He didn't just, argue against injustice, he ridiculed it, making his points, memorable and thought-provoking.
Definitely. And his impact, you can't deny it. Voltaire's tireless advocacy for reason, tolerance, and justice, it continues to inspire thinkers and activists today.
Yeah. So we've gone from Spinoza's pantheism to Voltaire's sharp wit, highlighting how philosophy kept evolving from those ancient Greek foundations. But there's so much more to, uncover, right?
Oh, of course. And that's where someone like Immanuel Kant comes in,
Yeah.
who Durant calls the great Chinaman of Königsberg. He, revolutionized our understanding of how we even perceive the world.
Kant's known for, really complex ideas.
Yes.
But Durant does a good job of, breaking them down,
Yeah.
especially his concept of the categorical imperative.
Yeah, the categorical imperative is basically Kant's golden rule. He argued that our actions, they should be guided by principles that could be, universalized. In other words, if everyone followed the same rule, would it still hold up?
So it's not just about consequences.
Yeah.
But about the principles behind our actions, like moving beyond self-interest and considering like universal moral laws.
Exactly. Kant believed that these moral laws, they weren't based on religion or tradition, but were like inherent in reason itself. He thought every human being had this innate moral compass, a sense of right and wrong that went beyond like cultural differences.
Wow. But Kant's ideas weren't like limited to ethics.
No, not at all.
Durant also mentions his transcendental idealism, which is, well, definitely a concept that requires some, mental heavy lifting.
It does. Transcendental idealism explores how our minds, they actually actively shape our experience of reality. Kant argued that we don't just like passively absorb information, but we organize it. We interpret it through these categories of understanding, like space, time, and causality.
So what we perceive as reality is actually like a mental construction,
Right.
shaped by both sensory input and our mind's own like structuring principles.
That's the essence of transcendental idealism and have these profound implications for how we understand knowledge, perception, even like the very nature of reality itself. It's a good reminder that what we see as real is influenced by our own minds.
And speaking of minds, Durant then introduces us to Arthur Schopenhauer, who, well, he had a rather pessimistic view of life.
He did. While often labeled as the philosopher of pessimism, there's much more to Schopenhauer than that. He, took Kant's ideas in a new direction, focusing on this concept of the will.
Durant describes Schopenhauer as like this brilliant but troubled soul who saw the world driven by this like blind, relentless will that just leads to suffering and dissatisfaction.
Yeah. Schopenhauer believed that this will was the fundamental reality behind everything. It's constantly, striving, desiring, and never finding true satisfaction. He saw human life as this like cycle of desire and disappointment, always chasing goals that ultimately leave us empty.
It's a pretty bleak picture, no doubt.
Yeah.
But even in like Schopenhauer's pessimism, is there like a glimmer of hope?
I think so. Schopenhauer argued that we can find a degree of peace by like detaching ourselves from this striving will through art, contemplation, and compassion. It's about recognizing the futility of those endless desires and seeking solace in something beyond our individual ego.
So finding peace requires like a shift in perspective
Yeah.
or recognition of the like limitations of desire and like searching for meaning beyond ourselves.
Exactly. And this idea of transcending the individual will, it really influenced later thinkers, especially Friedrich Nietzsche.
Nietzsche, the philosopher of power, champion of the Superman, the ultimate rebel against traditional morality. His ideas are, well, definitely polarizing.
They are. Nietzsche took Schopenhauer's concept of the will and like flipped it,
Mm.
arguing that the will to power is the driving force of life.
Yeah.
And that we should embrace it, not deny it.
Yeah, he like challenged conventional morality, rejected the quote herd mentality, and celebrated the individual who dared to be different, to forge their own path.
He saw Christianity as a slave morality that glorified weakness and submission. He called for a transvaluation of all values, urging us to create our own moral codes based on strength, vitality, and self-affirmation.
That's a radical message and certainly controversial, but it's resonated with a lot of people, those who, want to live life on their own terms, unshackled by like traditional morality.
And you can see Nietzsche's influence in all sorts of fields: philosophy, literature, psychology, even politics. His ideas continue to be debated and reinterpreted, which I think shows their enduring power and relevance.
Yeah, it's fascinating how each philosopher, they kind of build upon or challenge the ideas of, those who came before them, creating this like rich and interconnected tapestry of thought.
It's a testament to the enduring power of philosophical inquiry.
Yeah.
These ideas, they continue to resonate, prompting us to question, to reevaluate, and to find our own place within this, ongoing conversation.
And from the ancient Greeks to Nietzsche, it's been quite an evolution of thought. But Durant, thankfully, he doesn't stop there. He goes on to explore how these philosophical threads, they make their way into our own time.
Yes. He highlights the emergence of these new philosophical movements like positivism and pragmatism, which, attempted to grapple with the challenges of a rapidly changing world.
Yeah, so these movements, they sought to ground philosophy in a more concrete and relevant way. Positivism focused on scientific observation, empirical data, and pragmatism emphasized the practical consequences of ideas.
It was a move away from those grand, overarching metaphysical systems towards philosophies that could address the practical concerns of modern life.
Right, and within that landscape, we meet Herbert Spencer, who tried to merge the insights of science, particularly Darwin's theory of evolution, with this like comprehensive philosophy of society and progress.
Spencer's often associated with, like, social Darwinism, but he was much more than that. He developed a vast system of thought known as the synthetic philosophy, which aimed to, explain everything, from the evolution of the cosmos to the development of human societies.
So one of Spencer's like key ideas was that evolution, it wasn't just a biological process. It was like this universal principle that applied to all realms of existence, including human culture and institutions.
And he argued that societies, like organisms, they evolve through this process of natural selection. This idea has been both praised and criticized, because it can be used to justify social progress, but also, unfortunately, ruthless competition.
Yeah. And Spencer, he actually advocated for individual liberty and like limited government, believing that social evolution would, naturally lead to a more just and equitable society.
Yeah.
His ideas were incredibly influential, especially in the late 19th and early 20th centuries, shaping, political and economic thought both here and in Europe.
He definitely left his mark. But as Spencer's ideas gained traction, this new philosophical movement emerged in America, pragmatism. And one of its leading figures was William James, a philosopher and psychologist who brought a fresh and engaging perspective to the philosophical landscape.
Oh yeah, James. He like emphasized experience, practicality, and the importance of, individual perspectives. He wasn't interested in searching for like absolute truths. He argued that an idea's meaning lay in its like practical consequences.
His famous saying, "Truth happens to an idea, it becomes true, is made true by events," it perfectly captures his pragmatic approach. For James, an idea is true if it works, if it helps us navigate the world and make sense of our experiences.
It's a very like results-oriented approach to truth.
Yeah.
And this extended to his views on religion too. James was fascinated by like the psychological and experiential aspects of religious belief, arguing that faith's value lies in its ability to provide meaning and purpose.
He even wrote The Varieties of Religious Experience, which explores all the different ways people experience the divine, from, mystical states to those like ecstatic visions.
James's work just felt like this breath of fresh air in the, sometimes rigid world of academic philosophy. His writing is just infused with like humor, humility, and this deep respect for individual experience.
It made his ideas both accessible and profoundly insightful.
Totally. And with that, we've gone from the ancient Greeks to the dawn of the 20th century, traversing like this rich and diverse landscape of philosophical ideas.
And it doesn't end there. Durant continues to trace how these philosophical threads, they weave their way into our own time, highlighting new philosophical challenges that, force us to re-examine our assumptions and seek new ways of understanding the world. He introduces us to figures like John Dewey and George Santayana, each bringing their, unique perspectives to this ongoing conversation. So it's clear that the exploration of these big questions is far from over.
Yeah, and that's what's so compelling about philosophy, right? It's this never-ending conversation, a continuous exploration of these like fundamental questions that have captivated humanity for centuries.
For sure.
And as we, continue our deep dive into the story of philosophy, we'll see just how relevant and thought-provoking this conversation remains. It's amazing how these like philosophical threads, they, weave together across time.
Yeah, it's really quite something.
Speaking of which, we're moving on to John Dewey, who, as Durant explains, developed this like very distinct, I guess, American approach to pragmatism.
Dewey. Oh, he was a fascinating figure. He was a real champion of experience and learning by doing.
Mm-hmm.
He believed that education could be this powerful tool for, social change. He felt that thought always needed to be grounded in action, and knowledge should be, used to solve those real-world problems.
Yeah, his ideas about education, especially as a tool for social change, they feel really relevant today, like more than ever.
Totally.
He believed that learning should be like active and hands-on, not just, passive absorption of facts.
Right, it's about doing, not just listening.
He really emphasized like critical thinking, problem solving, and collaboration.
He wanted to empower individuals,
Mm-hmm.
to become these active participants in their communities. His vision was to equip people with those skills to, analyze issues, think critically, and work together to find solutions.
It makes you wonder like how we can apply his emphasis on like experiential learning and critical thinking to the, challenges we're facing in our own society. I mean, just think about all the like complexities of the world today. We're constantly being bombarded with information, right? Knowing how to like think critically is more important than ever.
Absolutely. Dewey's ideas, they really laid the groundwork for progressive education,
Mm.
which focuses on that student-centered learning, hands-on experiences, integrating subjects across, different disciplines. It's
Mm.
about fostering, like, curiosity, creativity, and the ability to actually apply knowledge to, real-world situations.
And Dewey's influence, it went beyond education, right?
It did.
He wrote a lot on ethics, politics, and social theory, always advocating for that, like pragmatic approach to social reform.
He was a firm believer in using, experimentation, collaboration, and this deep understanding of human needs as the basis for driving positive change. He saw democracy as, like, more than just a form of government, it
Yeah.
was a way of life.
So for Dewey, democracy, it requires active participation, critical thinking, and a willingness to like adapt, right, to new information and, well, changing circumstances. It's not a passive system. It demands our like engagement.
Exactly. It's an ongoing
Mm.
process, always evolving, always requiring our, active participation.
Now, from a champion of social change like Dewey, Durant takes us to a very different kind of thinker. George Santayana, a philosopher and poet, who brought this like unique blend of skepticism, aestheticism, and I guess historical understanding to his work.
Santayana was a complex figure, often contradictory even. His writings are just like filled with these brilliant insights, but he was also really critical of what he saw as the excesses of, modernism. He appreciated the power of reason and science, but he also maintained this like healthy skepticism about their limitations.
Yeah. His famous quote, "Those who cannot remember the past are condemned to repeat it." It speaks to his, deep belief in the importance of understanding history.
Oh, absolutely.
He saw it as like essential for navigating the present and avoiding, the mistakes of those who came before us.
He even applied this like historical lens to his analysis of religion, culture, even philosophy itself. He
Hmm.
saw philosophy as a form of, poetry, this attempt to understand the world through metaphors and symbols, which, while insightful, are, ultimately limited by human language and perspective,
That's a like fascinating take.
isn't it?
So for Santayana, while philosophy, helps us grasp the world, it's important to like acknowledge those inherent limitations.
For sure.
Our knowledge is always, partial, shaped by our individual points of view.
Right. And despite his skepticism, there's also this sense of like beauty and wonder in Santayana's work, this, recognition of the complexity and the richness of, well, human experience.
Durant, he categorizes Santayana's philosophy as a form of naturalism, this viewpoint that sees the world governed by like natural laws without a need for supernatural explanations.
Yeah, he rejected the notion of, those absolute truths, emphasizing that what we know is always influenced by like our own points of view.
Right.
But even within that skepticism, there's this like sense of awe for all the intricacies of human experience.
It's interesting how, like, throughout history, so many philosophers have grappled with this tension, right?
Oh, yeah.
Between seeking objective truth and then recognizing, the limitations of our own perspectives.
It's a constant balancing act for sure.
It is. And that brings us to Bertrand Russell, who's, a true giant of 20th century thought,
Yeah.
a philosopher, mathematician, and social activist who just, like, embodied the spirit of his time.
He did.
Durant describes Russell as someone who combined like intellectual brilliance with this like deep moral conscience. He wasn't content to just like sit back and, contemplate the world. He actively sought to make it better.
He was a prolific writer and, just a tireless advocate for peace, justice, and freedom of thought. He made major contributions to, logic, mathematics, the philosophy of language, while also engaging in all these like public debates on a range of social and political issues.
Durant really emphasizes Russell's belief in the importance of like logical analysis and clarity of thought. He felt that a lot of, philosophical problems just stem from language confusion, and that if we, carefully examine the meanings of words, it could help like untangle these issues.
Right, because sloppy language often leads to sloppy thinking.
Exactly. And he was a staunch supporter of the scientific method, arguing that knowledge should be grounded in empirical evidence and, logical reasoning. And he didn't just apply this to like abstract ideas, he applied that same rigor to his, social and political views.
Yeah, he was an outspoken critic of like war, imperialism, nuclear weapons. For Russell, reason and compassion, not blind ideology or, self-interest, those needed to be the guiding forces in human affairs.
He believed that those principles, applied to social and political issues could actually lead to a more like just and peaceful world.
It's a powerful message.
Yeah.
and one that I think resonates even more strongly in our own time, given all the, complex challenges that we're facing.
Absolutely. So from Socrates to Bertrand Russell, we've traveled through centuries of philosophical thought, encountering this remarkable array of ideas, arguments, and perspectives. What stands out to you from this, journey?
What strikes me is just the sheer diversity of thought and the, evolution of ideas over time. Each philosopher, builds on challenges or refines what came before, really showcasing the dynamism of philosophical inquiry.
Yeah, it's a testament to the enduring power of these, big questions, right? And
Okay.
as Durant emphasizes, the journey isn't over. New philosophical challenges, they keep emerging, demanding that we, engage with them, question our assumptions, and find those new ways to understand ourselves and the world.
And those challenges, they often mirror the social, political, and even technological shifts, happening all around us. Philosophy isn't static, it's always evolving alongside, well, the world.
Which brings us to another crucial point. Durant doesn't just leave us with this, historical overview. He wants us to connect these ideas to our own lives.
Exactly. He doesn't want us to just admire these, great minds from a distance. He wants us to engage with their ideas, to use them as tools,
Yeah.
for understanding and navigating our own complex world.
He reminds us that, philosophical inquiry, it's not just an intellectual exercise. It's a process that can inform our values, our choices, and ultimately how we, live our lives.
That's where the real power of philosophy lies. It's not just about memorizing theories or arguments. It's about using these ideas to, examine our own beliefs, to challenge our own assumptions, and to live, more meaningful and examined lives.
It's about finding those ways to apply these, ancient and evolving wisdom traditions to the unique challenges and opportunities of our own time. So it's amazing, right, how Durant connects all these different thinkers across, time, really showing how their ideas, they still matter.
Yeah, remarkable.
But before we wrap up, Durant has one last philosopher for us to meet.
Saving the best for last.
Yeah, maybe. So he concludes with Bertrand Russell, who was a true polymath, philosopher, mathematician, social activist. Durant really paints him as someone who, perfectly embodies 20th century thought.
He really does. And Russell, he was just so prolific. He wrote on everything from logic, mathematics to the philosophy of language. And he wasn't afraid to, jump into those public debates either on all sorts of social and political issues.
Oh, for sure. He was a passionate advocate for peace and justice and intellectual freedom too. Durant describes him as, someone who had this incredible intellectual brilliance, but also a really deep moral conscience.
Right. He wasn't just a thinker, he was a doer.
Definitely. And one of the, I guess, key takeaways from Durant's, exploration of Russell is his emphasis on logic and clear thinking. Russell, he believed that so many philosophical problems actually came from confusion about language.
Right. We get tripped up by the words themselves.
Yeah, exactly. He argued that by, paying close attention to the meanings of words, we could kind of untangle a lot of these philosophical knots.
It makes sense. I mean, sloppy language, it often leads to sloppy thinking.
For sure. And he was also a big champion of, the scientific method, arguing that our knowledge of the world, it should be grounded in empirical evidence and logical reasoning. And he didn't just, apply this to abstract ideas. He applied that same commitment to reason and evidence to his own social and political activism.
Yeah. He put his ideas into action.
He did. He was a really outspoken critic of, war, imperialism, and the development of nuclear weapons. He felt very strongly that reason and compassion, not blind ideology or self-interest, those should be the guiding forces behind human actions and political decisions.
It's inspiring to see how he lived his philosophy, using his intellect and his influence to actually advocate for a more just and peaceful world.
It really is. So we've come a long way from the ancient Greeks to Bertrand Russell. We've explored this incredible tapestry of philosophical ideas. As we, conclude our deep dive into Durant's The Story of Philosophy, what are some of the key takeaways that stand out to you?
I think what resonates most with me is this idea that, philosophical questions, they aren't just stuck in dusty textbooks or those ivory towers. They're alive, they're relevant, and they're constantly evolving right alongside our world. And engaging with those questions, whether it's about the nature of reality, the meaning of life, or even, the best way to live, it's a crucial part of what makes us, well, human.
Totally. It's all about asking those big, why questions, challenging those assumptions we have,
Mhm.
seeking deeper understanding. And while there might not always be, easy answers, the process of like inquiry itself, that's so valuable.
I agree. It's about cultivating that sense of, intellectual curiosity and recognizing that philosophy. It's not about reaching some, final destination. It's an ongoing conversation.
It is. And as Durant so, skillfully shows us, it's a conversation that's been going on for centuries,
Yeah.
with each generation, adding their own voices and perspectives.
And now it's our turn, right? To join in, to draw inspiration from these amazing thinkers, to grapple with the questions they raised, and to, find our own answers in this ever-evolving search for wisdom and understanding.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with, a final thought-provoking question. Given this vast and constantly changing, like, landscape of knowledge and all the different, philosophical perspectives we've explored, how can you, the listener, develop your own personal philosophy? One that, like, guides your actions and choices in a world, let's be honest, full of, competing values and beliefs.
It's a challenge, for sure, but it's one worth embracing. And just remember, philosophy, it's not about finding that one right answer. It's about cultivating a, thoughtful and examined approach to life. So keep questioning, keep exploring, and keep diving deep.